Good morning and welcome to DrayTek's first webinar of 2022. I'm Melanie Charles, DrayTek's Channel Marketing Manager, and I'm excited to introduce today's topic and presenter. We know this is an important topic to you because over 800 people have registered for today's webinar, and we thank you for that. Our presenter is Alex Shuker, and as CTO for our UK and Ireland operations, he is constantly reviewing industry trends and broadband developments. This presentation will cover the status of fibre to the premise, or FTTP, here in the United Kingdom, and we'll share updates on announced rollout plans for 2022 and beyond. He will also briefly review how DrayTek's technology fits into this changing landscape. We estimate today's session will take less than an hour, and that includes the live Q&A at the end. So just a quick look at the agenda, and just FYI, this session is being recorded, and so it will be made available to all those who have registered for the event and posted to our website. So the agenda today, as I mentioned, will be a summary of current coverage across the UK. We'll also look at what's happening in 2022, and we'll look at the technologies kind of employed for these rollouts. Then we'll look at DrayTek compatibility with these technologies and how new and old products can be used. And then we'll close out the webinar with a Q&A session. All right, and with that, I think I'll be handing this over now to Alex.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So I'd like to start with just a bit of a summary of the current coverage and how progress was made in 2021. So to start off with, let's just go through some of the terminology I'll be talking through just to get ourselves a bit orientated. There's a lot of different terms, and sometimes they're used in slightly different ways. So I just wanted to bring something up here just to start with it. So on the first column, I've got the label of the broadband. So we've got standard broadband, super fast, and ultra fast. And these relate to different types of technology. Today, our main focus is on FTTP, so fibre to the premise broadband, sometimes called full fibre. Implementations of fibre to the premise are classed as ultra-fast broadband, so they're generally above 300 megabits per second, but customers can pick packages that are lower than that if they don't feel they need a really fast connection, and budgetary reasons can be a good one for not picking the most expensive package. And if we look at the different technologies, you can see in the list here we've got ADSL and VDSL, and I've listed which type of connection it is. So the older technology, ADSL and VDSL, they have some form of something that's not fibre on the net on the link. So the green cabinets are the ones that you would generally have somewhere in the last mile that then runs to the property, and the exchange is where all the infrastructure is run by the network operator that then connects with the ISPs. The first few are sometimes referred to as the first two, the GFast and the VDSL, are sometimes referred to as fibre connections, but they're not really full fibre because there is a copper element still in there. So they're not able to get the same sort of speeds you would do if you've got a full fibre optic connection, and also potentially slightly less reliable because it's going over a kind of an older technology, and it's not going to be as fast. The lower two here are the kind of full fibre and gigabit connections. Virgin Media is a bit of a special case, which I'll get into, because they have a fibre network that does have some coax on it, but they have rollout plans where they're moving to actually deploy full fibre across the whole of their network, but still have a bit of coax at the very edge of it, just for connecting the customer to the connection. But we'll look at those when I go through the different operators. Want to now look at the broadband connections that we currently have connected in the UK in the total number of connections by type. This is the number of people who are connected to these different services, which is slightly different to another term which is called properties passed. So properties passed is a term that network operators use to be the number of properties that their footprint has gone past and they could connect a customer to if they passed the property within a certain period of time. Different operators have different kind of measures for how they consider it to be a property pass, but generally it's if it's considered if it's something that they can connect within a reasonably short period of time, kind of in a kind of a few days to a few weeks, to actually give the actual connection to the end user. And that would count as a property pass. But the first thing to look at is actually real connections. So what people are actually using as an active broadband connection. Here we got it over time. So you can see if we go back in time, 2007, there was really just ADSL or cable as the choices. And if we go on, VDSL started around kind of late 2010, and the rollout increased in 2011 going onwards as that was rolled out around the country by Openreach. We look at where we are now in 2021. We've got some other technologies as well. So we've got FTTP and GFARS as well. The total number of connections is around 27 million total connections currently in the UK, of which 4 million of them are now ADSL. That's decreasing as people's connections are being switched over to modern technologies. Around 60 million of VDSL. We've got around 234 that are GFast, and 5.3 million cable, and a little bit less than 2 million currently of FTTP. So that's of actual connections, but there are more that have been properties passed, which we'll look at in the next few slides. If we look at availability, this is sourced from Ofcom's data. We've got a situation where around kind of in excess of 90%, so 98% of people can get a connection that is faster than 10 megabits per second. But if we look at the higher end, the full fibre, according to Ofcom's data from September, it was 28% could get a full fibre connection if they wanted to order one. But then if we then look at the different regions and look at the later data from December, it's increasing. As we can see, the picture in England is full fibre of 27, Wales and Scotland are similar, and then Northern Ireland has a number of 71%, so they're doing quite well when it comes to full fibre availability. But if another organisation called Think Broadband monitor the postcode availability and look to see how the rollouts are changing as the rollouts continue with different network operators, they then add those to the postcode finders, which allows a user to see if they can get broadband at a different type, and that often gives them more current data, and they're showing that the current full fibre picture in England is around 30%, and the gigabit capable is now actually 66.9%. That's because Virgin Media has completed their enabling of DOCSIS 3.1 to allow their cable service to offer up to 1 gig connections to all of their subscribers. So if we look at how the coverage has changed, the average speed that's been recorded is up to, in 2021 was around 50, which is a slightly misleading figure because the actual speed test when only looking at full fibre connections was 145 megabits per second, and cable was 100. I expect the cable one will change as people's packages get upgraded to 1 gig and the faster speed rollouts increase. The 2022 FTTP availability is looking like kind of 31 and 65%, and this is kind of sourced from Ofcom and also from the Think Broadband monitoring. If we now look at the build plans for 2022 and want to look at the different plans of different operators. So if we look at the current UK properties passed by different network operators, we can see that the leading the way is Virgin Media, because they've got a network that's got 15.5 million properties, of which they've got 5 million active connections, and these are primarily really cable, so it's not technically all full fibre, because it's uses hybrid coax, but I will just explain that a little bit later about how they're changing, and they've got a rollout plan to convert all of their properties to full fibre. Openreach is at 5.1 million, which has increased a bit from last year, and their plans for the future have increased. Previously, last year it was they said it was going to be 20 million, but now they've upped that to 25 million by 2026. And there's various other organisations I've got here that I've listed. These are some of the kind of alternative network providers of different sizes. CityFibre are quite a significant one, because they've got plans to cover around 1/3 of the UK by 2025, and currently they've gone up to around 1 million coverage. They kind of operate as a bit of a network operator in the same kind of model as Openreach, so they're not actually providing an ISP service to an end user. They work with ISPs to offer that package. And if we look at some of the others, they're like people like Hyperoptic and Community Fibre are focusing around cities, same as CityFibre. Hyperoptic specialise in kind of multi-build properties and working with developers to roll out the network. Kcom is in the northeast, in the in the Hull area, and they've got a network of around 250,000 properties that they've rolled out full fibre for now, and they plan to expand that a bit now to expand out of their traditional footprint to get up to 500,000. There are some other smaller properties where you can smaller network operators where you can see the numbers are slightly smaller, but we'll look at some of those. Some of those are regional, and some of those specialise in rural areas and providing full fibre to rural communities. One notable example of that is B4RM, which is broadband for rural north, and then we have Jurassic Fibre, that's the southwest, and Oggy, which are catering for some of the rollouts in Wales. The kind of altnets are available. If you look at their website, you'll be able to see if you could check, but one good way is to use the Ofcom Checker, because it can tell what networks are in the area. For example, if I put Exeter in there as a postcode, I can see the network that's listed is Jurassic Fibre. That you can then go to that doesn't guarantee that it's active though, because for the individual addresses you have to check to see if it's actually the service is enabled on there. So you then have to go to the in this case the Jurassic Fibre website to check to see if the availability, and they've actually finished kind of the rollout and connecting it. Just want to look at some of the government initiatives. The biggest one is the BDUK, which is Building Digital UK. They had some funding that they were doing, which some of these are close to new schemes, but they're generally kind of responsible for ensuring that the UK homes and businesses can access fast connectivity, and the government ambition of getting everyone connected to fibre by 2025 has a good chance of success. They, as part of the previous schemes, I think allocated around 1.2 billion of budget, but they've recently announced a new 2022 rolling national open market review, which is a way of getting feedback from various operators to look at the rollout plans of those operators, so that they can get a better picture of where the government should be investing money in trying to help with the areas that are not commercially viable. It's a tricky thing to do, because they need to follow kind of state fund aid rules, but also they don't want to be funding commercial rollouts that are going to happen anyway. So there is some element of not wanting to discourage the commercial rollouts from occurring, but then the commercial rollouts in some cases will wait to see if they're going to be able to get funding for some of the more tricky things that aren't as commercially viable. So it's a kind of a finely balanced thing. There's a total of 5 billion of investment, and Project Gigabit is the kind of later version of that investment strand, where there's some current programs that I've listed here, which involves a voucher scheme to help people get connected, and some gigabit hubs to look at connecting schools and community buildings. The barrier busting section is about trying to make it easier for rollouts to occur. For example, things like make it easier to get access to land for doing work, and making it easier to do street works, and supporting adding the kind of new build connectivity, because for the new operators to roll out fibre, they not only have to roll out the connections around, but they also have to build the infrastructure as well in those areas as well. So there's a lot of things that are barriers that they're trying to work out the best ways to help people through. And if we look at the biggest operator, Openreach, the build program, they are currently at a build rate around 47k premises per week, and have, I think, stated that they're currently rolling out 770 meters of cable per minute, which, when you think of it, will hopefully mean that they're covering a lot of the ground. Their build pace is aiming for about 4 million FTTP connection properties passed per year. That wouldn't mean that they'd have to have a rate of 76k per week. So their build rate of 47k isn't quite going to reach the ambition, so they have to look at ramping up the build rate to be able to do this. They have recently given the new program of properties that they're areas that they're doing their builds for, that they have on the Openreach website. There's always a list of where they're building, but they've just recently updated that in January this year with a list of the new properties that they've added. So you can always check that to see new locations that have been added, and it has the different times for the build phases that they've got, and kind of tells you if the phase is complete. You can, for any postcode, look at it, and often the checkers will be able to give you an indication, but it doesn't necessarily mean because it's started the build phase that they've actually finished the connection, that you'll be able to actually, that it will be on stream and be able to be ordered, because it does involve more than just rolling out the infrastructure in the street. They have to do all the other connections as well. In total, the investment with Openreach is currently 15 billion pounds of investment for their plans to do their whole the rollout that they've stated for 2025. Another operator that's got quite ambitious plans is CityFibre. They're planning to go up to a third of the UK market by 2025, and they're focusing around cities and towns, and also starting to look at villages as well. So they've got a £4 billion investment, so that's quite substantial as well. Their progress in 2021 was they started builds in around 60 towns and cities, and they've announced that for 2022 they're going to be building up to 150 towns, cities, and also they've now said villages. So I think they're starting to look at some smaller installations as well, but they're going to hopefully connect kind of 8 million homes and 800,000 businesses. They I've published kind of low build locations, so you can see around where it is around the country, often in the major kind of cities around the UK. And they have a model where they act as the network operator but don't act as the ISP. So what they do is partner with ISPs. I think they've got around 30 consumer ISPs that they partnered with, and they offer two different ways that the ISP can connect. Either through local access, where the ISP would have some presence in the local fibre exchanges that CityFibre roll out as part of their rollout plans, or alternatively, they can also provide some kind of internet national access interconnects to some of their major hubs, so that the ISP doesn't have to have presence in every single city that they're operating in, which I think the idea is to make it easier for ISPs to get started with the rollout and then look at deploying more infrastructure in local areas if they're finding it successful. But it's a very similar kind of network operator and wholesaler method to kind of what BT and a wholesale and Openreach do. If we look at Virgin Media, they, as I mentioned, recently updated the whole network to support DOCSIS 3.1, which is still a cable service that allows them to provide up to around, well, technically it's slightly higher than 1 gig, but their main service, the top line one is called the Kcom service. So that provides quite fast speeds to users. But they have an upgrade plan called Project Lightning, which is partly a refresh of their network, but also a bit of a network expansion, where they're going to convert all of their network from a hybrid fibre optic network to a full fibre network. Currently it's 1 million has been converted, but they're planning to do the full 14 million by 2028. The cost to them will be about £100 per property, so it's a 1.4 billion investment. This is a lot lower than the 15 million pound Openreach, sorry, 15 billion pound Openreach investment, but it's a lot cheaper for Virgin Media because they're using their existing ducts and just changing the coax part to fibre. So it's something that they can do at, I think, a faster rate. The stated plans mean that they'd need to do around 37k properties per week over the years up to 2028, and they've currently got 5.7 million fixed line customers, and their plans for the next FTTP upgrades at Stoke, Salisbury, and Wakefield in 2022. So I'm sure that will continue. Then if we look at some of the regional areas, if we look at Scotland, there's 2.7 million kind of total properties in Scotland, of which 28% are full fibre, and there's about 59% gigabit coverage, which is provided by Virgin Media. The BDUK funding recently, it's got 8 million for additional 3.6k properties in some of the regions I've listed here. This has been won by Openreach. Actually, all of the funding that's been offered by the government has been won by, I think there's 3 different ones that they've all been won by Openreach as the partner to do the rollouts. There's various commercial rollouts that are happening covering the towns and cities. Openreach have passed about 500,000 properties so far, and the current plans cover about 1 million to full fibre in total currently, but I'm sure that will expand over the next few years. CityFibre also have a presence in Scotland, primarily focusing in their first build in the major cities of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Inverness and Aberdeen, but there's some other areas where they've announced that they're doing their new build locations that I've listed here. Additionally, there's a smaller altnet ISP called BROADWAY, who are looking at some more rural areas. They have in their network a mix of fixed wireless and FTTP, but they have plans for 250,000 premises by 2025. And their focus is mainly on kind of rural areas, so looking at places where the major providers are not operating. We look at Wales, there's 1.4 million total properties, of which 420k can get full fibre and 47% can get gigabit, which is up about 9% on last year. The government programme in Wales is the Superfast Cymru programme that has 70,000 premises connected so far, and 39,000 premises are planned for summer 2020. So this is in addition to the kind commercial rollouts, this is where they're focusing on the hard to reach areas and the more rural ones that wouldn't be covered by the commercial rollouts. In total, it's possible around 234K could be covered by this, as they're not currently part of the commercial plans. That may go down as operators find some more builds commercially viable, but currently there's around 15K homes and businesses with speeds of less than 10 meg, so that's a bit of a challenge in the rural areas to try and work out how to roll out FTTP. But the main operators are Openreach and Virgin Media. But there are some notable other players in the market. There's Oggi, who are also used to be known as Spectrum Internet, but they rebranded as Oggi. They won a £200 million kind of project for FTTP, which will initially do 4K properties passed in some of Wales, with a target for 150K hard to reach areas with their rollout. So that's quite a large rollout for them in Wales. And also Broadway has some build plans as well in Wales, in addition to the ones that they also did in Scotland. And if we look at Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland is kind of in the best place when it comes to full fibre rollout. They've currently got 760K properties, which is 768K properties in total, of which 78% of them are full fibre. It's primarily an Openreach rollout. I think they've had a build rate of around 3.5K properties per week, but there is also a very large Virgin Media network there as well, as can be seen by the 81% gigabit capable availability. But there's another operator called Fibre, who won a government project called Project Stratum, which is they currently have passed 58,000 properties in Northern Ireland, but there's a £100 million investment into non-commercially viable locations, which will cover 76,000 properties. So I've got a list of the ones that the kind of premises that they've been announced. So that should help boost the Northern Ireland's full fibre footprint even further. So with all of the different rollouts there, one of the questions is kind of when is it going to be available, and sometimes there can be decisions about whether to wait for a connection or to go down a more traditional kind of lease line type service. It can be kind of tricky to see. So there's a few recommendations. One is to use the Ofcom Checker on the postcode, because that will generally show the networks in the area. But this only gives a general indication. Just because it lists a availability, it doesn't mean it's guaranteed, because it depends on the exact address, and sometimes the postcode isn't precisely accurate to what is actually available for an address. So you then need to look at the networks that are listed in there and go to each of those to check the availability. So in here I've looked at the Openreach one, and you can see it's for that postcode was only showing up to 80 meg, and then looking at the same one with Virgin Media reports that you can get Virgin Media, and also doing the same one there reports the full fibre. With CityFibre, with them they then recommend to select different full fibre providers. If you went independently to one of the providers that use CityFibre, I'm sure that if you put in their postcode checker, they'd be able to confirm what services you could get. And in some cases, when using the Openreach one, it might not report fibre products in the area, even if it's even if you can see that they've got some rollout plans. That's due to the time for the rollouts to complete. But they often do offer a way for people to put something so they can get contacted if there's a new if the rollout becomes available. So that's a bit of an overview of the build plans. Let's now take a look at the technologies being employed in fibre rollouts. Try not to get into too much detail, just a bit of an overview, but let's have a look at what kind of is fibre when we're talking about GPON based FTTP. So full fibre is quite complex to implement. Largely is using a technology called GPON, which stands for Gigabit Passive Optical optical network to share a fibre uplink between multiple premises, which uses a passive optical splitter, like a prism, to share the optical signal over multiple fibre strands. The ISP will provide their own box. Typically, it's kind of similar to a DSL or cable modem, but it's called an ONT, optical network terminal. This box is normally managed by the ISP, so they don't let the business or consumer to select that box. It has to be their equipment, and this is because of compatibility with their GPON network. This shared data all goes to all the ONTs connected to the fibre, but only the ONT that is intended to receive the data can decrypt it. You can't decrypt the data that's not intended for your ONT. So the GPON implementation that's often deployed, it gives around 2.4 gigabits of download to share amongst all the fibre connections for that group of connections, and it gives up to 1.2 gig up. So it means that if you had 3 or 4 people on a 1 gig service, they wouldn't be guaranteed to all receive 1 gig at the same time. Each ONT gets a time slot to send the data, and that allows the upstream bandwidth for all the connected lines, and the actual line data rate would be based on the package that the subscribers paid for. We look at the kind of ONTs. You can see they kind of have a fibre connection that goes directly into the ONT. We look at the kind of general network. There's normally about, we go back 150. We go from the right to the left. It's about 150 kind of meters to a connectorized block terminal that has multiple connections. There's normally kind of around 5 or 6 properties, up to 12 connected to one of those, and then it goes back to a splitter node that then has multiple of the connectorized block terminals going into, and then there's aggregation nodes that then go back to the head end. The similar sort of rollout is done in multiple dwelling units and buildings, but just the manifold and connecting blocks will be kind of in some sort of access area inside the building, and then distributed internally in a similar way. So I mentioned about the speeds that GPON is only up to 2.5 gigabits per second, but a lot of the network operators are already taking this into account, and actually have, once they've rolled out their GPON network, it's reasonably straightforward for them to upgrade it. So the main cost is involved in rolling out the fibre and digging the trenches and conduits. Once you've done that, the upgrading the system is not as difficult. So there's other networks here, other technologies. There's a lot of acronyms, but it's quite straightforward to read through them. X just means 10, so XG is a 10 gig passive optical network, so that's up to 10 gig, and then the S stands for symmetric, so that's 10 gig symmetric. So as you can see, the down speed is 10, up speed is 10. That would be shared amongst all the providers, but that means that you'd be able to guarantee faster connections to people. And then there's next generation NG is the next generation, which is looking at 4 by 10 gigabit per second links, and then we got 25 GPON, which is 25 gigabits per second. I think Community Fibre are using XGPON, and Openreach are running trials with 25 gig PON that they've announced, and CityFibre are planning to use NG-PON too. So they're all looking at making sure that their capacities are good enough once they've rolled out and got lots of subscribers. The technology can all coexist because they use slightly different frequencies, so they can actually have different types of those around the network, and so that means that it's not there isn't any problem with the selection of different technologies for them internally. And if we look at now the DrayTek compatibility with these technologies and how you'd connect to a new or old product. So the FTTP diagram here just is the internal. So you'd have the customer splice point that has the fibre optic coming in and goes into the ONT, and then we need to then connect the DrayTek router. So if we take a closer look at the ONT, we've got, as we can see, the fibre optic port that connects in from the ISP, and then we have an RJ45 Ethernet port. So we can just connect the RJ45 Ethernet port to any DrayTek product that has an Ethernet WAN port. The best ones for this are the kind of high performance products we've got listed here. So the 2927, 2962 and 3910, because these support up to kind of 1 gig, 2.5 gig and 9 gig on the WAN side. So they're quite good, but there's a lot of others in the range that are supported for those throughputs, especially things like the 2865 as well. Although the 2865 or 2866 is often used on IDSL on WAN 1, its WAN 2 port can support the same sort of speeds as the 2927, so can easily cope with a kind of high 900 megabit per second WAN connection, and has the kind of VPN performance to match that as well. But if you've got an older model, often you'll still be able to use that with FTTP as well. If we look at some of the older models here, got the max firewall speeds there, so it does depend on the speed of the package that are being given. However, if you've got, say, a 2862 that has a 400 meg firewall performance, you can actually increase that by enabling a feature called hyper acceleration. With hyper acceleration, it boosts the performance, so you can get the WAN performance going from 600 to kind of around 900, or from 400 to 900 on some of the older models. We've got some details on hyper acceleration. There's a specific webinar we've done on how to enable that, pros and cons and things so just more technical details on that. So if you check that on the website, there's a webinar that covers that, and also we've got some additional materials as well to do with hyper acceleration. On the kind of FTTP setup, it's quite straightforward. I'm not going to run through that right now, but we do have a support guide that explains how to do the FTP setup. Typically, it's a kind of PPP where you put in a username and password on the WAN interface, but there's a guide there if you want to take a look at that to get some instructions on how to connect any of the DrayTek products to FTTP. So that covers the content for today. So just in summary, hope you found that useful, looking at the rollouts of the different operators around the country, and I've got some useful links that you might want to for further reading. One of the big things about the FTTP rollout is what it's going to have for PSTN. We've got some specific blogs on the end of analog, because with full fibre, you don't need to have a copper cable, so the analog connection might not be available, and Openreach have plans to withdraw their PSTN network. So that's going to have some implication. I think that the future is to offer this over voice over IP, but we have a blog that talks around some of those topics, and also some more details and technically of how GPON works as well. So I'd like to now move on to the Q&A to see if we've got any questions that anyone would like to ask.
Right, thanks, Alex. Thanks for a great session. Very informative. Looks like the United Kingdom is on track to get faster broadband to many communities. I just wanted to reiterate to everybody that this webinar is being recorded, and we will get the recording out to everyone who's registered and posted on our website. We'll also try to include some additional reference materials that have been mentioned during the webinar and on this last slide. And then I also believe there's additional webinars planned throughout the year on the topic of FTTP, as well as transitioning from DSL to fibre. Now, and then one last thing before we just jump into the Q&A, I just wanted to remind everybody to please fill out the survey at the end, because this will give us a great idea of the future webinars that you would like covered. All right, with that, let me jump into some questions that we had come through. And so first up, Alex, are there plans in place to ensure that there's still customer choice for ultra-fast services? And the premise here is presumably once one provider has already installed fibre in the area, is there an incentive for additional providers to come in to provide a connection?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and that is a topic that it's difficult for people to handle generally, because when it comes to the rollout, overbuild, which is where you've got two different network operators offering FTTP for the same area, is a little bit of a waste of resource, because it means that funding is being kind of put into one area where it could have been spent somewhere else where there wasn't coverage. But I think having choice for people is quite important. For many network operators like Openreach or CityFibre, they're acting as wholesalers, so you can still get a choice of which specific ISP. So there might be additional services that people operate, but it would still be going under the underlying kind of infrastructure. But I think there will be a little bit more of a problem in the short term when it comes to some of the areas that are more difficult to reach, because there will be specific funding for certain people to roll out there, and if it's not commercially viable, then it's less likely there will be competition. So I think from the consumer choice point of view, that's possibly not the best. However, there is a good rollout currently of the super fast broadband, so the kind of up to 80. So it does mean that is a little bit of competition for the FTTP as well. But it is something that's that it's a little bit of a balance, and I think there will be some situations where people have the only availability of full fibre of an operator they perhaps don't want to go with. But as the rollout's complete, I think that the picture might get better, because as operators have completed their rollouts, they'll then probably look at how they can expand the coverage more. And also, as the rollouts are completing, they're working at ways to roll out for lower cost as well. So that might make some areas that commercially weren't viable a couple of years ago might become commercially viable as they look at more new techniques about how to dig trenches or reuse infrastructure, or reduce the other barriers that just basically increase cost.
Excellent. A question came in about DrayTek routers here, looking at what's the benefit of going with a new DrayTek router if older routers like the Vigor 2860 and Vigor 2862 can also go up to gigabit speeds with hardware acceleration?
So I think there's our hardware acceleration webinar, I think, covers that in a lot of detail, which I'd recommend looking at, because with hardware acceleration, there are some impact on it with some of the features. So in some cases, enabling hardware acceleration might impact a feature, for example, on the older models, something like QoS. But with the newer models, there's a great capability with some of the other functionality. So more than just being able to get download speeds, it's to do with the VPN capability, or the ability to host more users. If you've got a router as their quarters, the later models which support more VPN tunnels and can, for the connection speeds, allow users to get faster VPN tunnels in. So the new models can help on that side.
Okay. We had several questions come in, kind of trying to find out exactly where fibre is rolling out in their areas. Two in Pacific came in. One was for central London, and the other one was about CityFibre. Can you give some tips of where people can find that information about where rollouts are happening in their area?
Yeah, the people like CityFibre and Openreach, they often list on the websites where they've announced to. So the best place, first protocol, would be to go to some of those places. You can also do a postcode checker on those sites. They'll often tell you if the services are enabled currently, and some of them will actually say if they've got plans to include it as well. So that's the first protocol there. The Ofcom one is quite a good general first place to look at as well, but it doesn't cover the plans that are in motion. So sometimes it does need a little bit of looking at some of the regional people that you're in your area to go to their websites to check to see what their plans, and it is, I think, something that's a little bit frustrating for people, that they can see some announcements of a certain town is been announced that's going through, but it's difficult sometimes to get exact details of where they are on the build plans. I think it's kind of understandable in some ways, because sometimes build plans can take longer than they expected, especially recently with things like COVID that did cause some interruptions. But I would try and go to the websites of the network builders to see, because they often have some information.
All right. I also think ISP Review also has a good broadband finder for like planned rollouts too.
Yes, they do. That's quite good on there as well.
So there's another question, just a very general question, kind of just better understanding the stats that were kind of provided during the webinar, and they just wanted to make sure the numbers that you kind of included about, homes passed or active lines, those include both residential and business connections, correct?
Yes, it mainly focuses on kind of residential and small business. The figures didn't really include the lease line connections. It's more focusing on FTTP, but it does include businesses on the FTTP side.
Okay. And then one last question here. When it comes to these services being installed, can you just quickly remind people what actually happens to customers if they've got POTS within their home? What happens to their phones, their analog phones, and things like that?
So with Openreach, if they've got a kind of a fibre first build, they would be looking at turning off the PSTN network, and the ISPs would often offer a VoIP alternative that the consumer would be able to use instead.
Okay. That's it for the questions I have readily available here. I think with that, we can actually close out the webinar. And again, please, if you see that survey pop up once you close out of the webinar, please fill it out and give us your candid feedback, as well as additional topics that we can cover throughout the year here at DrayTek UK Ireland. Thanks, Alex. Thanks so much.
Thank you.